Hey, everyone. We're going to get started now. Thank you so much for being here at the first office hours. I told my editor that we were doing something called office hours, and she made the trenchant comment that I am not in an office, and in fact have not been in an office for several years. And even in the before times, I was not in an office either. A lot of times when I was living in New York, I would work from home. So we can call this office hours to a certain extent. I guess we could also call it basement hours. That's where I am reaching you from, my own basement. Basically, this is an opportunity for me to talk to you about my work. I really love talking to readers about what I'm working on. And in particular, what I'm working on right now that I'm really, really passionate about are these themes of progress, what I call the abundance agenda, this question of how do we solve the world's biggest problems and how do we inspire people to believe that the world's biggest problems can be solved. So I'm interested in answering lots of questions about progress, the Progress Project and the abundance agenda, but honestly, anything that you're interested in asking me about, I will be interested in talking to you about. So thank you so much for being here with us. If you want to follow the project of progress and follow my construction of an abundance agenda to solve problems of material scarcity, you should sign up for the newsletter. Newsletter is called Work in Progress. You can sign up for it at theatlantic.com/newsletters/work-in-progress. If that's a little bit too complicated, you can probably just Google Derek Thompson, The Atlantic Work in Progress, and sign up for the newsletter that way. So let's jump into it. We're going to do 5 to 10 pre-selected audience questions that you guys submitted. And then I'm going to be taking questions live in this chat after I've worked my way through those 7 questions, which hopefully will inspire a bunch of offshoot questions if I fail to answer some questions to your satisfaction or inspire other thoughts. So let's go into it. Question number 1 is from Stephen. And Stephen asks, I don't hear you express the kind of fear and pessimism that's very common among those concerned with climate. But I was hoping you might be able to explain why, with perhaps some specificity, you actually feel hopeful about our future. So why feel hopeful about our future when it comes to climate change? Very difficult question to get us started. Let me give you the reasons to be pessimistic before I give you the reasons to be optimistic. The reason to be pessimistic about climate change is that we've never solved a problem like this before. And when I say we, I mean the most collective we, the most liberal we as a human species. This is a coordination problem unlike any other coordination problem we've ever had to solve. Because even if New York City solves the problem of decarbonizing the grid and reducing their energy emissions, that doesn't solve the problem for New York State. If New York State solves the problem, that doesn't solve it for America. If America as a country solves the problem, well, the future of emissions on a per capita basis and on a total basis, the future of emissions growth is really coming from Asia and Africa, from developing countries. So if the US sort of flips some switch and suddenly just completely solves the climate change problem, that actually doesn't solve the climate change problem for the world. It's an incredibly complex coordination problem. And any solution that is a true solution has to scale across not only the United States, but around the world. Other reasons to be pessimistic. The Republican Party doesn't seem very interested in this problem at all. It's not obviously a priority for just about any Republican that I can name. When you look at the Democrats, Democrats I don't think are very effective at turning their care for climate change into a movement to build the infrastructure necessary to actually decarbonize the grid, right? Like at the national level, you've got this understanding of the problem of climate change. You've got the Green New Deal. You've got bureaucrats who can recite with exquisite detail everything about how climate change works and how it's being modeled and how it's going to screw up the world. But when you get right down to it, you've got lots of left-wing NIMBYists along the East Coast, in California, across the country, who don't want to actually build out the infrastructure necessary to decarbonize the grid. You present them with the opportunity to build wind energy, and they say, ugh, that ruins my eye line. You present them with the possibility of building out a solar plant or with nuclear, and they have all sorts of issues with the safety risks and the way that that construction could sort of mess up their life and inconvenience them. So we really need to move from what I've called in another article, the invention stage to the implementation stage. But this brings me to my reason for being optimistic. We have invented everything that we need. What do you need to decarbonize the grid? What do you need to take the world into a bio age, into an age where we're not getting our electricity and getting our energy from oil and coal, high emission sources, but rather getting it from wind and solar and nuclear and geothermal? You need a lot of invention. And the truth is that we have that. In the last 10 years, the price of solar electricity has declined by 90%, while the efficiency of lithium-ion batteries has increased by 90%. That's a huge deal for creating and storing renewable energy. That's a reason, I think, to be optimistic. We've made a lot of progress in invention. We have the tools that we need to solve this problem. What we need now is the willpower to build. And I see some green shoots when it comes to the willpower to build. I see these green shoots in Europe as they confront the reality that they don't want to be forever enthralled to an autocratic oil dealer in Russia. I see it in the green shoots in abundance politics. People like me, Ezra Klein, Noah Smith, Matt Iglesias, Jerusalem Demses, a lot of people are writing about a new kind of liberalism, a supply side progressivism, a supply side liberalism, a liberalism that builds, abundance agenda. There's a lot of people that are behind this new movement that I think is really central and important to the cause of decarbonizing America and then inspiring the world to follow suit. Last thing I would say, and you can hopefully see that I'm pretty charged up about this. This, I do think, is an issue that can cross the political aisle. Like, people have asked me, what's the Trumpist case for green energy? What's the Make America Great Again case for green energy? How do you get nationalist conservatives, the J.D. Vances of the world, on board with an agenda like this? And here's a story that was told to me that I'll repeat to you. Right now, if you look at a neighborhood of, let's say, 100 people, and they're using oil and coal in order to power everything that they're doing and drive their cars. Well, you could tell them that every single time they turn on the car, they're sending money to Saudi Arabia. They're sending money to Russia. They're sending money to the world's autocrats, right? They are choosing to power their lives by participating in an economy that is helping the bad guys, capital B, capital G. But what if they all had solar panels on their roofs? What if that neighborhood was powered by wind energy and that power was held by domestic, local battery technology? Then when they turn on their car, their neighborhood is powering their car. So the money is staying in the neighborhood. And maybe that means, more money for schools, more money for police, if that's what you want, more money for that community. So there's a clever way in which I think the green movement can make the case for green energy in a surprisingly Trumpist way. And the reason to do that is that you need lots of people on board. You have to build a movement that gets not just the lefties, not just the Birkenstock wearing denizens of Berkeley, but you need that sort of center and center right. And I think it's good for the green energy movement to be able to make arguments that can grow in different gardens. All right, that was a lot for question number one. Question number two, Joel asks, how much do you think the extended COVID student loan pause has contributed to the crazy housing market? For years, it was conventional wisdom that student debt was holding millennials back from buying homes. Then suddenly student loans got paused for 2.5 years and the housing market went wild. Coincidence? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Okay, so I have two responses to this. The first response is that I do think that the COVID student loan pause was underrated as a form of stimulus. I think a lot of times when people like me, frankly, like economic analysts, talked about the ways in which the federal government was helping people during the pandemic, we talked about the stimmies, we talked about the checks. We didn't talk about as often was this student loan pause, which was essentially a money transfer to tens of millions of people who otherwise would have been spending hundreds of dollars out of their pocket every month, every few months, but instead were being able to keep that money and thereby spend it on whatever they want. So I do think that it was underrated as a form of stimulus. I do not think it's been a major driver of the housing market. And the reason why is that people don't just need short-term cash payments to buy a house. The student loan pause, I think, has made it easier for people to pay rent or to pay off their mortgage if they have a mortgage. But to make a down payment in this economy where home prices on average are higher than they've ever been, you need ample savings. And those ample savings, I think, probably require more than, say, 1.5 years of a student loan pause. This isn't 2005. Obviously, this isn't an environment where you can make a down payment on a house that's like 2% of the home value and then put the rest on an interest rate mortgage. This is an economy where you need ample savings for that down payment. And I don't think the student loan moratorium has been so essential for building the money necessary to make down payments in an extremely expensive market that a lot of these college graduates are living in. Your Denver, like places like Denver, San Francisco, in Boise, Washington, D.C., New York City. You need a lot of money for those. I think the student loan moratorium has stimulated spending cash rather than help people sort of amplify their savings enough to really make a dent in the housing market. But I could be wrong there. It's a great question. Question number 3. Joel asks, we're back to the agenda, the abundance agenda with this question. Joel asks, Biden seems to be doing, quote, Defense Production Act for everything, baby formula, solar panels, lithium batteries, et cetera, because it's one of the only tools available for government to intervene in supply problems. What other tools do you think ought to exist to cure supply problems? What are the most effective policy levers to pull or promote abundance of essential and socially valuable goods? My God, Joel, a man after my own heart. What a fantastic question. So first, a bit of background. The Defense Production Act, it's a law passed under President Truman, I think, that allows the president, typically through executive order, to direct private companies to basically prioritize orders from the federal government to make that which the federal government wants them to make. You know, it can come with loans, it can come with like purchase commitments, but it's basically a way for the executive branch, for the president to sort of turn the dial of domestic production and say, this is what we want more of. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it works really, really brilliantly. But I would love to see the, what should we call it? You know, abundance agenda portfolio to be expanded, right? I want more arrows in that quiver. So more arrows. Number one, you got trade policy. You know, one of the reasons why we're in this position when it comes to baby formula is that our trade policy is incredibly mercantilist, incredibly constrictive when it comes to baby formula. You've got these European countries who clearly are pretty good at keeping babies alive, making all this baby formula, and the US is basically like, we're going to make it as hard as possible for European baby formula companies to export their stuff into America. Like, even if American moms are like, please give me the goat milk baby formula, we're still like, no, we're going to make it really, really hard for you to get that. So I think you'd probably see some trade liberalization to make it easier to grow global capacity to produce certain goods that are in high demand within America. Related to that, you know, and we're right back to baby formula as a key example, you know, I am not a pure libertarian at all. I'm not even sure I'm a liberalitarian, but I think there's lots of rules that deserve to be struck down in order to grow America's capacity to produce abundance of certain essential goods, right? I'm talking about deregulation here. You know, sometimes it's environmental regulations that get in the way of our ability to build roads and bridges and, you know, mega projects and green energy projects. So sometimes it's environmental regulations I think we should want to strip away. Sometimes it's regulations that exist in places as specific as a baby formula market that are really constricting our ability to have a resilient large number of companies that are producing the same good, so that if one company goes down, you know, we're not in a crisis situation. You know, right now, because of a variety of things I'm not going to necessarily get into, you know, the US system, WIC, makes it so that very, very few, sometimes only one company is providing the majority of baby formula to individual states. And that means that if that one company has, let's say, a bacterial infection in a Michigan plant, well, then they're knocked out and suddenly you have 40 to 50% of the baby formula that should be on shelves, not on shelves. The last thing that I think we need, right? So you've got Defense Production Act, which is sometimes important. You've got trade, you've got deregulation. Obviously, sometimes you want sort of pure demand redistribution, right? It's important to provide for the supply of a lot of essential items, but you also want to make sure that people can afford it. The last thing is persuasion, which is a little bit touchy-feely, but like, I want more people to make the case for building. I want more people to be making the case for an abundance agenda. Like, who's the Senate caucus for abundance? Where's the abundance caucus? Where's the supply side progressive caucus in the House or in the Senate? Where's the foundation or the advocacy group? You have places like the Institute for Progress, which I consider allies in this regard. But why don't we have more people that are making the case to say, America has a serious problem right now when it comes to material scarcity. We didn't have enough masks, then we didn't have enough vaccines, and we don't have enough baby formula, we don't have tampons now. Where is like the panel of people that are considering America's problems of material scarcity to be among the most important problems facing this country? Haven't even gotten to housing, because that's a question that's forthcoming. But I would love, again, for us to be thinking harder about how do we make a persuasive case for abundance politics in this country? And how do we use the case for abundance politics to help, let's say, Democrats win more elections for people that really care about this? Joel asks, it feels very weird that we are 2+ years into a global pandemic and Congress hasn't passed a big pandemic preparedness bill yet. Holy crap, yes. We are missing the type of forward-looking response Congress took after 9/11, e.g. the Patriot Act, love it or hate it, and the global financial crisis, Dodd-Frank, love it or hate it. Where is the pandemic bill? What should be in it? Guys, you're, I mean, I should be paying you guys to be my assignment editors. These are incredible questions. First off, I'm in total agreement with the thrust of this question. I think it's frankly insane that we don't have a pandemic preparedness bill. I have general thoughts here and I have specific thoughts here. The general thought is that you can hate the Trump administration. You consider that guy to be like, a wannabe authoritarian who's a mortal risk to the existence of democracy in America and so on and so forth. But Operation Warp Speed was fantastic, full stop, right? It does nothing to diminish the case against Trump as an individual to state that Operation Warp Speed was a fantastic program that more liberals should think of as a model for their ends. Now let's talk about this pandemic. The total cost of the pandemic in the US was, by one count, $16 trillion. The final bill will probably be higher. More people are going to die. This era of inflation, possibly stagnation, possibly recession that we're going through, that was partially created by the pandemic, is going to be costly in ways that we're only beginning to think through, only beginning to really grapple with. So 16 trillion and 1 million deaths. Speaking of where's the caucus for the abundance agenda? Where's the caucus to build public policy around this crisis? I mean, I totally agree with the question. After 9/11, we had the Patriot Act. We created the Department of Homeland Security. We created a whole department. That was 2,000 lives. It was a terrible, shocking tragedy. We reoriented our foreign policy around this tragedy. 1 million people are dead. 1 million people are dead. Where is sick leave? Where is Operation Warp Speed for other vaccines? Where's the Manhattan Project for other vaccines? It just seems so obvious to me that this century is going to be a century of pandemics. And I'm not even going to get into monkeypox, which, crossing all my fingers and my toes, is not going to be as bad as it initially seemed when that line looked exponential. But so look, on the details of a pandemic preparedness bill, last September, the White House put together what I think it was the American Pandemic Preparedness Plan, APPP. Congress, I think, has basically fallen asleep at the wheel here. They have authorized significantly less money in their own plans, and then they have failed to advance the plans that had less money that was authorized in there. So I'm working mostly off the script right now from Nikki Turan at the Institute for Progress, who's done a lot of the heavy lifting on this question of what a pandemic preparedness bill should actually look like. And one of the really important points that she made in one of her articles at the Institute for Progress website is that if you compare the White House pandemic preparedness plan to the Prevent Act that came out of the Senate, which also, by the way, has not passed, you see this extraordinary diminution of ambition. The White House puts out a plan that's relatively ambitious, but not ambitious enough. And then the Senate puts out a plan that's not ambitious enough and doesn't pass. And now we're just basically doing nothing. You compare these plans, and APPP from the White House plan had $24 billion for vaccine preparedness. Prevent has $0. AP3 from the White House had $11.8 billion that they wanted to put toward therapeutics, things like Paxlovid, pills that you can take even if you don't get or don't want or can't get the vaccine. Prevent had $0 for this. The White House had $5 billion for diagnostics, finding ways to test for the pandemics of the future. Again, Prevent had $0. I just think that, again, this is about willpower and it's about priorities. I understand that inflation is a 5-alarm hair on fire problem, but the pandemic is still killing hundreds of people a day. It does nothing to diminish the tragedy of 9/11 to point out that more people die of COVID every single week, still, I believe, than died in 9/11. And yet we're still operating from a federal policy standpoint as if it doesn't exist, as if the pandemic is something we're trying to memory hole as fast as possible. I mean, bare minimum, you need paid sick leave and you need more sort of domestic spending on investment in ventilation technology and ventilation deployment. But the fact that we're spending so little energy trying to build out the technology for and the infrastructure for developing vaccines for other kinds of viruses that could be coming down the pike, I think is an absolutely shocking abnegation of responsibility. And I share the questioner's just utter shock that this isn't being prioritized at the level that it should be. On a fun level, we've been talking a lot of abundance agenda and the problems with the federal government. Here's a fun question. What are the top 5 pieces of media that you've consumed this year? Joel lists novels, nonfiction, articles, podcasts, TV shows, movies, etc. So here's like a media diet of mine outside of reading Twitter nonstop, which is basically how I live my life. On TV shows, I only basically watch 4 TV shows. I just watch them over and over and over again. I justified this sometimes by saying that I have a very high taste for novelty in ideas, and therefore I have a low taste for novelty in media. I just need to like reconsume the same thing over and over again. And basically, the TV shows that I watch over and over again are there's really just 3: Succession, Veep, Arrested Development. Like that's it. I literally think that's 90% of my TV watching. I rewatch Succession, Veep, and Arrested Development. I've also recently enjoyed Bosch on Amazon Prime, which is the TV show that's based on the Michael Connelly books. In terms of psychoanalyzing these media choices, I'm a pretty agreeable guy. I've been told by some that I'm a pathologically agreeable guy. I really don't like conflict. I really don't like making enemies. And it's not lost on me that I only consume content about despicable people. Succession, they're all terrible. Veep, they're all terrible. Arrested Development, other than Michael Bluth, they're all like kind of terrible. And I'm not sure why I like media about despicable people, even though I'm an incredibly agreeable person myself. I should probably investigate that therapeutically. Podcasts, my entire podcast diet is, again, it's pretty limited. Sports podcast, The Ringer. I love sports podcasts. I love sports, football and basketball in particular. The Ezra Klein Show I listen to consistently. And The Partially Examined Life is a philosophy podcast. And I particularly like those guys' stuff on existentialism and phenomenology. We will not be going deep into what existentialism and phenomenology are or mean to me. That will be for a future episode of Office Hours or Basement Hours. But I love podcasts about philosophy. Novels, my taste is very basic. I love Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen, best novel I read in the last year. My wife just finished Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan, which I loved when I read like a decade ago. And she said was one of the best novels she's read in years. So I might reread Visit from the Goon Squad because, again, reconsumption is my entire media diet. Nonfiction. I'm really excited about 2 books that are just behind me here. One is by J. Bradford DeLong, Slouching Toward Utopia. This is a history of the world in the last 140 years, which is the era of modernity and technological progress he's particularly interested in. And this is What We Owe the Future by William McCaskill, who is an effective altruist philosopher and, full disclosure, former roommate in New York, weirdly enough. These 2 books are basically about the last 140 years and or 150 years and the next 1,500 years. So I feel like between these 2 books, I've got most of past and future history covered. I also really enjoyed Chatter by Ethan Kross, which is a book about self-talk, essentially the dialogues we have with ourselves in our head. I'm very interested in, this is kind of phenomenological, but like I'm very interested in like our experience of life interiorly. How we talk to ourselves as we go about our day is, I think, an underexplored subject, but also an enormous part of our lives. Like our interior relationship with ourselves is a hugely important aspect of life. Obviously, I don't know if that's cheeky or corny or profound. But Chatter's a really interesting book about self-talk and how we talk to ourselves and how we should talk to ourselves in a more wholesome way. And finally, the magazines I subscribe to, other than The Atlantic, are the London Review of Books and the New York Review of Books. I think they're like a great liberal arts education to take me just off the news because my life is just so plunged into the news cycle all the time. Last question that we have that are pre-questions before I quickly go through and rapid fire the questions that you've asked here. Tor asks, I live in Los Angeles and I am a YIMBY. That means yes in my backyard, build all the stuff in my backyard. Almost no one here in LA, even renters, wants to see new housing units of any kind get built. Why? Because everyone thinks it will make traffic worse. So how do I convince people that if you build housing with fewer or 0 parking spots, this will keep new housing units from creating additional traffic? People here simply cannot wrap their heads around it. I love these questions so much. Tor, thank you for this question. Speaking of chatter, I feel like you are like all up in my self-talk, mirroring the questions that I ask about the world. So I'm going to interpret this question as like, why is YIMBY such a tough sell? Which is another way of asking the question, why is NIMBY such a popular argument? Not in my backyard. Don't build stuff. I believe the housing abundance crowd, like me, needs to meet people where they are. People don't like construction noises. They don't like traffic. They don't like change. They don't like the idea of the property values going down. So how do we win those votes? The question is, how do we win them on material issues? We're building more housing. Housing means more people. It means fewer homeless people. Don't you hate having a bunch of homeless encampments around you? Well, we should build more housing. That's important. But also, I want to win it on values. And one value that I'm playing around with when it comes to the abundance agenda is the value of the future, the value of intergenerational power. So like, think about Social Security. When people willingly depart with their money, with the Social Security tax or the payroll tax that you pay every 2 weeks, you do it to provide for the financial security of another generation, or at least that's a story you can tell. Like whether that $1 is going to pay for grandma is its own thing, and I'm not going to get into that. But like the idea of the payroll tax and Social Security is that the working generation is helping to pay for the retired generation. That is a popular program kept aloft by the value of intergenerational security and intergenerational respect. Housing abundance is also about intergenerational respect. I've had conversations with older people who say like, ugh, they're building this condo down the street and it's horrendous. And it's like creating all of this construction noise. And then 5 minutes later, they're like, ugh, my grandkids can't find any housing. It's crazy. It's like, do you see how these things connect? Do you see how your unwillingness to allow construction to exist in anywhere around you is contributing to a housing crisis that is making life difficult for your grandkids? That's intergenerational respect. I am willing to sacrifice a little bit so that other generations can thrive. That's what housing abundance, I think, is in part all about, that the haves can help support the have-nots. And I think you have to sort of win that case on respect. Okay, Zoom audience questions. Tony asks, in your article, everything is terrible, but I'm fine. I think it's from 2 weeks ago. I think you were onto something when you mentioned, quote, permagloom from the internet. To what degree do you think chatbots drive this? Is our chatbot-driven social media programmatically reinforcing the negative because it's easier to code and convince people to retweet or quote? I'll answer this really quickly. I think social media makes negativity aerodynamic, but also human nature makes negativity aerodynamic. I think, I'm not going to go full Jordan Peterson on this, are programmed to value negative emotions more than positive emotions. And that's because from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense that like dose for dose, negative emotions should like weigh on us harder, right? You can only be so much happier, but when you die, it's entire, like you are dead. So better to be safe than sorry, dead. That's, I think, like a reasonable evolutionary psychology argument for why negative emotions hit us harder than positive emotions hit us on a dose-by-dose basis. And I think that a lot of the things that we see on social media and in the news cycle are a reflection of the negativity bias that's somewhat inherent to human nature. Sahaj asks, you've obviously written about both the basic research stagnation and also about a host of deployment issues ranging from commercial to cultural. Like we have an invention problem and we have an implementation problem of that which we've invented. What is holding back economic growth more, invention or deployment? Both. Probably mostly deployment, but both. I think that we have a secular stagnation in invention, that it is essentially harder to come up with new scientific ideas and harder to make breakthroughs in new scientific domains for a variety of reasons. We're sort of climbing the tree of progress, and like understanding the polygenic origins of schizophrenia is just harder than understanding like what genes are. Like Mendel with the peas in his backyard, just figuring out dominant recessive traits. That was like one monk who figured this out alone. You need like teams of teams to figure out like the polygenic origins of schizophrenia. Our scientific problems are just harder, but also it's difficult to deploy sometimes what we've already invented in the physical world, like solar energy, wind energy. We are basically at time, sorry, I really talked a lot, but I'm going to be, as one last question from Ruth. Ruth asks, in the past, movements that have been successful were able to get bipartisan support, but it feels more and more impossible to create a bipartisan coalition for anything. If an abundance agenda were to get enough support to have legislative power, what would it look like? Ruth, great question. It would look like, frankly, and this is not something that a lot of my left-wing friends are going to like, but it would look like Senator J.D. Vance and Senator AOC shaking hands over the need to deploy more solar, wind, geothermal, and nuclear energy in America, and to build transmission lines and deploy battery technology to help store and transmit that power across the country. It would look like people who have nothing in common culturally to recognize they do have something common in the world of material abundance. That's all we have time for. I really appreciate you listening to me just spiel. If you missed this, or if I didn't get to your question, keep asking the questions, because we're going to be doing this basically indefinitely. We'll be doing this every month, these office hours, basement hours, going forward. You can read more from me at theatlantic.com and in our new print issue. If you enjoyed this conversation and want more of The Atlantic, you can support our journalism by becoming a subscriber. You can visit our website for more info on how to do that. And please join us if you can in New York City on June 28th for the next scientific revolution. It's going to be a discussion with scientists and doctors and futurists and ethicists about the next frontier in scientific research. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Subscribe to my newsletter, Work in Progress. And I really appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much.